Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about gardening, botanical history, and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is May 14th, and there are just 37 days until the first day of summer. Today we celebrate a happy lyricist and poet. We'll also remember a charming diary entry from 1938 written by a Canadian conservationist and naturalist. We'll honor a poem by Walt Whitman that inspired a beautiful composition that premiered on this day in 1946. We'll hear an excerpt about the healing power of the garden, and we grow that garden library today with a gorgeous book about Wave Hill Garden in the Bronx. And then we'll wrap things up with a little story about the origin of ketchup. Very sweet. But first, here's today's curated news. Today's curated news comes to us from Ideal Home. This is a post that was written by Tamara Kelly, and it's called Sloping Garden Ideas, Design Solutions to Make the Most of a Sloped Outdoor Space. Well, I tell you what, if you have a sloped outdoor space, then you probably have a space that is fast draining. And that, my friends, is a very good thing for most plants because that quick draining is something that most plants enjoy. Now, I love what is shared in this particular article because all of these design solutions are exceptionally clever and super functional. And Tamara starts this article out by reminding us that slopes offer an element of interest that flat perspectives simply can't. In fact, here she quotes John Wire, who's the CEO and lead garden designer at Bowles and Wire. John says, "Far from being a problem, a sloping site presents some of the best opportunities in garden design. Tackled carefully, it allows plants to be arrayed in layers so that successive sweeps of foliage and flower build onto one another." Now, as I mentioned in this particular article, there are a number of wonderful ideas, but I want to draw your attention to a few of my favorites. The first idea says to soften a steep slope with grass steps. And I know what you're thinking when you hear that. You're thinking of a traditional step that would present a huge mowing challenge. But you have to see the picture of these grass steps, because they are only partially stepped and they are perfectly spaced for a mower that can access the steps easily on one side, because one side of the step is completely left as a natural hill, and then it's cut into the hillside, and so the other half of the hill is a traditional step, and that's how you're able to easily mow this. But I also have to say that this is so visually appealing, so you have to check it out. And also, if you have kids, you really want to consider taking a look at this, because as I'm looking at it, I'm imagining the adults are going to take the stairs and the kids are going to do exactly what kids do, and they are going to have so much fun rolling down the side of that slope or running up and down it. I can already see it. Anyway, that's a spectacular idea. Now, another great idea is creating zones in different levels of the garden. So this is idea number 6. So definitely check this out, especially if you have a severely sloped backyard or property and you're wondering how you'll ever make any of it functional, because this is a great idea if you truly have a space that seems 100% unusable. And so again, the key here is zoning that slope and establishing little vignettes, spaces that you're designating to have certain functions, whether it's your relaxing zone or your fire pit zone or your dining zone, and so on and so forth. So be sure to check that one out as well. And then finally, the last one that I wanted to bring to your attention is number 9. It says, make a statement with lighting. And then here in this picture, we have a garden and we are on the lower end of the slope. And so we are looking up into the garden and there's a stairway and it's beautifully lighted, as is the fencing and all of the paths and some of the key plantings. And I know from my own personal experience what a huge difference that lighting can make in a garden. It can take an average space and truly elevate it. We did this at the cabin. We found some fantastic LED cafe lights online at Amazon. They were very reasonably priced, and I shared them in the newsletter for the show, and they are my absolute favorite. And you can also get a very inexpensive warranty for them through Amazon. I think the warranty was like $6 or something like that. And it's totally worth it, because then if anything happens to those lights, they snap in the cold, or I don't know, you have a huge storm and they get damaged, Amazon will replace them. And so that was fantastic to me. But my point in sharing this story is not so much about this product, but more about how the lights, those cafe lights, totally transformed our space at the cabin. We went from the house out to the big trees on the property and then kind of all around, and it just turned the cabin in the evening into this magical space. And also, if I ever need to dash out to the shed or to my potting bench or even onto the deck, I can now see what I'm doing because it's pitch black out there otherwise. So truly made the space enjoyable at night. In fact, on the Nextdoor app, I actually had a woman who lives across the lake. She sent me the nicest message and she said, I don't know who you are, but I truly appreciate the beautiful light display that I see every night. And of course, we started this during the pandemic last year. And so she said it was really, truly a day brightener for her, or I should say night brightener. In any case, she enjoyed it and we enjoyed it as well. So I especially resonate with this little tip that was shared by Tamara in this fantastic post about sloping garden ideas. Tamara shares, let me do a quick count here. How many tips are there? My goodness, I'm on number 12 and I'm still scrolling. Oh, it looks like 12 is the last tip. So there's plenty of tips here, lots of great ideas, fantastic pictures for you to draw inspiration from. And if you'd like to check out this post for yourself, just search for the word sloping in the Facebook group for the show. And all you do is head on up to the very top. You'll see a little magnifying glass. Pop the word sloping in there, and this post from Ideal Home will pop right up. And of course, if you're not in the Facebook group, please come on over and join us. We'd love to have you be part of the Facebook group, the listener community, and it's so easy to join. All you need to do is head on up to the search bar in Facebook where you'd search for that old high school friend or maybe an old neighbor, and instead type in Daily Gardener Community and then request to join. I'd love to meet you in the group. It's time for today's Botanical History. Here's Botanical History for today, May 14th. Today is the birthday of the American poet, lyricist, and hymn writer George Cooper, who was born on this day, May 14th, in 1840. Today, George is remembered for his happy song lyrics, which were often set to music written by Stephen Foster. And George wrote a little poem that's dear to gardeners called My Garden, and it goes like this. When fields are green and skies are fair and summer fragrance fills the air, I love to watch the budding rose that in my pleasant garden grows. But when old winter, fierce and free, has hushed the murmur of the bee, and all the fields and hills are hid beneath his snowy coverlid, oh, then my only garden spot is just this little flower pot. And it was on this day, May 14th, in 1938, that the Canadian conservationist and naturalist Charles Joseph Sauriol wrote in his journal, I have some most beautiful pansies from the seeds of last year. Pansies are a surprise packet. You never know what to expect, and you're never disappointed if you don't expect much. Planted a bleeding heart, have wanted to do so for several years. It's an old-fashioned flower. Mother always used to have one in her garden when I was a small boy. Well, isn't that adorable? Now, in case you're wondering, bleeding heart is in the poppy family. Additional common names for bleeding heart include the lyre flower and lady in a bath. Native to Siberia, Northern Asia, and North America, there are a number of cultivars for gardeners to consider, including the Alba, which has white flowers, Gold Heart, which has yellow leaves, and Valentine, which has red and white blossoms. Now, I ran across a great little website online that talks about the lore of the bleeding heart. It's called Auntie Dogma's Garden Spot, and it said, no other plant bears perfect heart-shaped flowers like those of the bleeding heart. If you press the flowers between the pages of a heavy book, you'll have papery thin little hearts to adorn letters or valentines. And if you turn a flower upside down and pull the two halves apart, you'll see a lady in a pink bathtub, or perhaps you'll see a white lyre with strings of silk. And then she shares the interactive story of the bleeding heart that uses one of the blossoms to tell this story. And I thought I'd share it with you in case you have little people that you're spending time with in the garden this spring. So to begin the narration of this story, what you want to do is hold one of the heart blossoms in the palm of your hand. And then you say, long ago, there lived a noble prince who tried in vain to win the heart of a very beautiful princess. The prince had brought the princess wonderful gifts from his travels far and wide. First, he presented her with two magical pink bunnies. And so at this point, what you do is you peel off the two outer petals of the blossom and then set them on their sides to display the two pink bunnies. Well, when the princess saw the bunnies, she barely looked at them. Well, the prince had one more gift saved for last, and he presented her with a beautiful pair of enchanted earrings. So now at this point, what you do is you remove the two long white petals and hold them next to your ears like they're earrings. Then you say, again, the princess hardly noticed the prince's gift. Now, the poor prince was utterly heartbroken. He realized that he couldn't try to win the heart of the princess. So he stands up and he pulls a dagger from his sheath, and then he stabs himself in the heart. So now what you have left is the heart shape of the flower with the stamen, and that appears as a dark green line that runs down the center. And so what you do here to illustrate this is you hold the heart up and carefully remove the dagger-like line. And what you're illustrating is plunging the dagger through the heart. Well, at this moment, when the princess sees what's happening, she is overcome, and she sees the dying prince and his unending love for her. But she realizes too late that she loved him back, and she cries out, "Alas, I have done wrong. My own heart is also broken, and I shall bleed for my prince forevermore." And so to this day, her heart bleeds for her prince. So there you go, the little story to illustrate the bleeding heart to a little gardener in your life. Now, if you'd like to print out this particular story, it's all typed out in today's show notes, and you can print it out and then share it as you will. But we're not done yet. We still have one more story for today's Botanical History. It was on this day, May 14th, in 1946, that Paul Hindemith's composition of When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, a requiem for those we love, premiered. And it turns out that this music was inspired by a poem of the same title by Walt Whitman. It's called When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed. Well, Walt wrote that poem in the summer of 1865. And in that summer, the country was still mourning the assassination of President Lincoln. And yet, in 206 lines, Walt does not mention Lincoln's name or the assassination. Instead, he uses nature and nature imagery to move the reader from grief to acceptance. And just as a little refresher, Lincoln was killed in the spring of that year on April 14th, 1865. Walt was staying at his mother's home, and he later recalled, "I remember there were many lilacs in full bloom that day. I find myself always reminded of the great tragedy of that day by the sight and odor of these blossoms. It never fails." And last but not least, there's a little fact about Walt that I like to share. When he was 54 years old, he suffered a stroke that left him paralyzed. And he spent the next 2 years immersed in nature because he believed that nature had the power to help him heal. He wrote, "How it all nourishes, lulls me in the way most needed, the open air, the rye fields, the apple orchards." It's time for today's Unearthed Words. Today's Unearthed Words come to us from Robin Wall Kimmerer, a mother, plant ecologist, writer, and SUNY Distinguished Teaching Professor. This is an excerpt from her book, Braiding Sweetgrass: Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. But spring twilight found her barefoot in the garden, planting beans and helping me fill my pail with earthworms that were severed by her shovel. I thought I could nurse them back to health in the worm hospital I'd constructed beneath the irises. She encouraged me in this, always saying, "There is no hurt that can't be healed by love." It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Nature into Art by Thomas Christopher. This book came out in 2019, and the subtitle is The Gardens of Wave Hill. In this book, Thomas introduces us to Wave Hill, a garden that opened to the public in 1967. A public garden in the Bronx, Wave Hill is known for its daring and innovative horticulture. Thomas takes us on a tour of the different areas of the garden: the flower garden, the wild garden, a shade border, and conservatory. In addition, Thomas reviews the plants that are used and the design principles that underpin Wave Hill. Enchanting and inspiring, Wave Hill manages to delight and instruct gardeners who visit all year long. This book is 296 pages of a private tour of a true jewel of the Bronx, the iconic Wave Hill. You can get a copy of Nature into Art by Thomas Christopher and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $3. So definitely jump on that deal if it's something that you're interested in. I think one of the reasons it's still around for that price is because it got released right before the pandemic. And so it's a real shame that there are some copies on Amazon for that price. But I know that they're going to go quickly because I know some of you are going to immediately get online and order this book, especially at that price. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. Today is the anniversary of the death of the American scientist, horticulturist, and physician James Meese, who died on this day, May 14th, in 1846. A son of Philadelphia, James was a passionate gardener, and he consistently referred to tomatoes the way the French did, as love apples. And in 1812, James published the first known tomato-based ketchup recipe. And although ketchup had existed in China for centuries, James added the tomato base, something that caught on not only in the United States, but also in England. Now, for his unique recipe, James used tomato pulp, spices, and brandy. Unlike other recipes, James did not use sugar or vinegar. And you're going to love this. He named his recipe Love Apple Catsup. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Maple Grove and Wyoming, Minnesota. If you want to read today's show notes, just head on over to thedailygardener.org. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free Friday newsletter. And don't forget that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. Just search for Daily Gardener Community the next time you're on Facebook and request to join. Last but not least, you can always get in touch by emailing me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and as always, have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you on Monday.